This is an important discussion because as we look at what is happening around the world in terms of firearm ownership, Europe is one of those that we can compare ourselves to. Similar cultures, similar histories, but in some ways very different. So today, this is an important topic for us to understand. How does this all fit? Particularly in the changes to the rules in firearm ownership that seem to be coming at us daily. For the record, I am a firearm owner. Some of my firearms may or may not be impacted based on the rules, and so there is a certain amount of personal interest in this topic as to what we're going to do. So, what is the European framework? What do we have to do? Well, it is mostly controlled by Directive 2021, so 2021, the year /555, which tries to make the European Union the same. How it reacts to personal ownership is the same. However, there is a major exception, and that is military weapons and their control are in the national purview. It is up to each nation to determine how military firearms are going to be handled. So the EU tries to control civilian use, allowing military to be in the hands of the military. These are profoundly different across the country, and it does, or across the European Union and beyond. And it talks about national, historical, and culturally embedded ideas. What is it that we look? And I think there are some lessons to be learned for Canadians in this. So we are a wide base on civilian rules, etc., as we go along. We all look at Switzerland as the major example. So if Joe and I are talking about military in the home, we go look at Switzerland. Small country, military service is almost mandatory. Well, it is mandatory to be in the militia. And as long as you are in the militia, you are, by law, to keep your service firearm in the home with ammunition. However, there are some things about Switzerland, besides being outside the European Union, that make it unique. It does have conscription. Most male citizens, almost all female citizens, served in the military at one point or another. They are issued a service rifle for which they are trained and given responsibility for in their home. So that rifle is to be there for the length of their service, which is a lifetime. So if you join the militias in Switzerland, you are deemed to be in the militia until you turn 60. So you may go for some regular training, but you are constantly being updated as you go along. Much as we heard from our guest speaker, and it was gratifying to hear that Estonia fits my script because it would have been hard to rewrite it in the time I had between. The training, inspections, all exist in Switzerland. It's not that you get your rifle, take it home, store it in the attic, and keep it for the next 40 years. You have to show that you've been using it. However, it is based on some priorities that we don't see necessarily in other places. So, for one, it has a strong civic culture. Switzerland sees itself as unique. There is mandatory training, so we're not just saying to anybody, go down to your gun store, grab one, and stick it in your attic. These are people who are trained to use it. There are clear legal responsibilities for everyone. Being in the militia does not give you carte blanche to shoot your local house burglar. And there is a tradition of firearm ownership in Switzerland. So all of these things make for a unique circumstance in Switzerland that really we don't see existing much in any other part of Europe, except where you get dragon's teeth on the bridge in Estonia. So the threat is real. There's a real, visceral, look out across my bridge, I can see the enemy feel, where the rules change as we go along. So clearly, there is no European law. There is no one law that applies to everything in Europe. There's a mandate, there's rules, but there isn't a singular law. What do we know? I worry that the things that make Switzerland a prime example as to why having firearms in the home is being undermined in Canada. I think it's being undermined in Canada. If the idea is that the more people that have firearms, the better and safer you are. Clearly, we're on a different path. Clearly, we're on a different path. If the idea is to say, I trust my neighbor with that firearm because they trust me, clearly not what's happening today, as we are trying to make legitimate gun ownership the problem. And I think I might be speaking to the choir here, but we are certainly feeling that I make the case fairly regularly that my firearms must be broken. Because if firearms kill people, mine haven't done so. They have not crawled out of the gun cabinet, walked down the street, shot my neighbor, and then snuck back into the gun cabinet. But yet, if you follow the missives that we see today, it often seems to be the case that the firearm is the issue because we don't trust citizens. Switzerland is clearly the opposite. It sees its citizens as part of the strength. Going to the Nordic states, Finland, highest civilian gun ownership in the EU, so more civilians own as a percentage than anywhere else. However, service weapons are not allowed in the home. If you serve in the militia in in Finland, you are leaving them at the base. Same thing in Norway, with an exception that there is a home guard that does allow some soldiers to take their firearms home if they're part of a specific unit. As we saw in the Estonian example, they allow it, but the government has indicated, to Joe's question, the government has indicated they don't like this practice and they're trying to phase it out. So as a soldier retires, turns in a service weapon, the new recruit is not getting the same opportunity to have it at home. It's going to be phased out in Norway. Sweden, all firearms are left on base. Same thing in Austria. So we're not seeing the major players in Europe following the thing, and Greece, same thing. So even the countries that have conscription, like Switzerland, do not automatically follow the Swiss model. In civilian ownership, we are seeing France, Italy, Spain, Czech Republic, and the Baltic states, all with strong service opportunities to serve in the military, but not to have the firearms at home. So so Switzerland stands alone. So what does Switzerland have that the others don't? A historically continuous militia system. It has not faded since World War II. It has existed ever since. It is in a geographically vulnerable position. Its civic identity is tied to being neutral, and that is each citizen maintaining that neutrality. And it has a robust training and qualification standards. All very different. So if you've been watching, and I'm sure you have, if you've been watching the news, you're going to see that the Canadian government, I always used to tell a story that the last time we table-topped an American invasion of Canada as the armed forces, the last time we did that was 1920. And it was sort of a seminal, check it off, we're done, we're never going to be invaded by the Americans, to promptly do it a year ago. And that response was, as David said, was to say that within about 3 hours of an attack on Canada, it was determined that the U.S. would be somewhere around Red Deer in a straight line across. It would take them about 3 hours to get that far. And I say this with all respect, I am not making fun. My daughter serves in the armed forces. She would be one of those people on the front lines. But we don't have the ability to stop this. So the idea is an insurrection. We should have the Canadians stand up and defend ourselves. At the very same time, the government is taking away the tools to do that. Is taking away the tools. These are a dichotomy that the people here in this room have to look at and address. Europe, no question, has said that they are going to do, I'm going to come off the slides because I'm not keeping them up. The historic reality of our existence with the United States has not fundamentally changed, but how we see ourselves is changing. The Europeans are doing the same thing. So at the same time we're restricting firearms use, so are they. Certainly counterterrorism is an issue that they look at and say, what if? They want to be EU harmonized, which means you go to whoever's seemingly doing it best, and you all copy that, as opposed to saying there's a pride in being separate in doing that. As has been inferred, there's domestic political debates that are saying, well, should we, shouldn't we, should we, shouldn't we? And those seem to carry more weight than the actual result. Having the debate seems to carry more than the result. And then breaking down of cultural traditions. So take that for what it is. But if you are used to firearms usage, they become part of who you are. I am married to a lady from Mexico. My wife, Maritza, is always amazed when I tell the story of getting my first 12-gauge shotgun when I was 12 years old. Right? My dad got me one to go duck hunting with him, stayed in his gun locker, stayed away, but it was mine. That was mine in the cabinet. So I grew up with guns. I knew what they were. She has a completely different view of what guns are used for, as we might have seen in Puerto Vallarta here in the last week or so. So different cultures bring different relationships to the firearms. And so as countries become more diverse opinions come to the front. And now we have to figure out, how do we marry those two? How do we take a look at new Canadians, those who have been here and grew up with firearms, how do we show that we can be useful with them? So, the use of firearms in the home will only exist if culture allows it. You can't force it. There can't be a vocal minority who says we want it, because if anybody follows the internet, people are constantly reporting their neighbors for having too many guns in the house, that they know they have them, that they're being reported to the police, and the police have to act, because what if we get another something happening? So we need to make sure that we're recognizing that. The reality is gun ownership across Europe and across Canada are changing as politics change. What do we know are absolutes? Culture has to accept it. Society has to accept that gun ownership is abuse. So, for all of us that believe that, we have to show that we're really normal and that your guns are broken too. I'm assuming no one here is admitting to murder, so if we're going to do that, we have to say firearms are owned by sane, rational people. That's number one, especially those who follow the system. Works in Switzerland. We may have to accept a certain level of training to go along with that ownership of firearms. That same 12 gauge I got when I was 12 is in my gun locker today. It sits there as a memory of my dad, who's now gone, and us going out together. The only training I've had personally for firearm use is to get my firearm certificate. Thank you to Hans and others like him that train us how to do that. But there's no ongoing process of training to make sure that people retain that. Switzerland does. And then there has to be a belief that having the gun in the house is going to provide some good. So our guest, who could mobilize within an hour against a very real enemy, that seems to be a logical conclusion. Little bit harder if you don't have that imminent threat. Switzerland believes since World War II it has been under imminent threat of being collapsed into Europe. Can all argue over lunch if that's true or not, but it's the fundamental belief in the society. So they are ready to protect their homes by using the firearms. Is there a lesson to be learned from Europe? I think there's only one. The more we erode the reasons to have a firearm in the home, including civic responsibility, including training, including all of these things, the less we have of that, the more likely it is the firearms will disappear. Thank you very much.